QOZ map and the colors, and if there's a key, we're going to take a look at that and see what we can provide for you there. Another question, Arnold, for you about the opportunity zones. Is it required that all ISDs included in the proposed charter school boundary zone are not located in opportunity zones?
Right. So I kind of understand that question. So I think our focus, and Heather, you can correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm misunderstanding this, but when we put this information into the TEA application that we submitted to the Department of Ed, we indicated that we would award priority points for entities that were opening a charter school in a qualified opportunity zone. So the proposed location would actually have to be within one of those orange boundaries, and you can either zoom in or you can type in an address. But in order to receive the priority points, the school would actually have to be located in a priority zone. And then certainly if you're located in a priority zone, the school district boundaries, a portion of those boundaries may be in the zone, but outside the zone or whatever. But you would basically open in the qualified opportunity zone or QOZ, and you would list the school district boundaries of students that you intended to serve who reside in those boundaries. But the awarding of priority points would be really based on where the facility is going to be located, whether it's going to be located in a qualified opportunity zone. And we'll certainly try to get this in the FAQ document as well. That's really the focus and intention of the TEA CSP grant to the department. And if, for instance, an applicant said, well, we found a facility that's actually outside the boundary, but we're going to serve a lot of students who reside in the QOZs, that's totally acceptable. And we would really welcome that, but we wouldn't assign priority points to that application unless the actual facility is located within the QOZ. I think that's really the intent.
Thank you, Arnold. I think there was a typo because he didn't mean to put not. So you answered his question perfectly.
Okay, great.
Here's another question for you. Can the grant funds be used to rent a building during the planning phase of the charter school?
Yes, I mean, the short answer there is yes. Again, rental or occupancy cost for the school facility up to the first 30 days of the initial implementation phase, right? The first day of school. In preparation for opening of the campus, the charter school campus is allowed.
Okay, thank you very much. Heather, I think I have a question for you. Are we eligible to apply for a virtual charter school through this process? And if so, how are the statements of impact and boundaries addressed?
The short answer is you are not eligible to apply for a virtual charter school. In Texas, you have to operate a brick and mortar before you can apply to be a virtual school.
Thank you. Here's another question for whoever would like to answer it. Can a private foundation that is a 501c3 provide a 990 PF tax return?
That's a great question, Drew.
That is a great question. I'm not sure what the PF is.
Yeah, I'm gonna say we'll look that up and it will be in the FAQ document. That's a good question.
Peja, this is for you. Are we required to assume 80% for ADA?
Hey, Peja, you are on mute.
Okay, it is suggested that you do 85 in the enrollment tab. That is a conservative but realistic estimate. So.
Okay, thank you. Another question for you, Peja. Is the first number the total amount of students estimated, including the special education students on the workbook? And I'm not sure which sheet it was.
That is also in the enrollment tab. Yes, you would enter your special education, career technology, all the different categories in that enrollment tab.
Let me clarify so the first the top part of the enrollment tab, that does include all students in special ed. And the bottom part of that, you would enter the students from that are participating in special ed. That helps with the weighted funding. And it's an additional funding source that would go along with just the regular FSP funding.
Yeah.
Thank you. Arnold, I have a question for you. Will using conservative enrollment numbers impact obtaining a CSP grant with regard to ADA? Is there an expectation for the CSP grant that can be found somewhere?
That's another really good question. And I don't really see that question as tied to the CSP grant as much as it's tied to the actual application for charter. If you're proposing to open a school with 50 students, is that really a high need or a community issue where you've got a lot of support? Probably not. I mean, we're, obviously, a $900,000 grant award, a new school that's authorized, can go a long way to serve a lot of students. So the answer is there's no minimum requirement for enrollment in a school that can be awarded a CSP grant. What will be critical, I think, to external reviewers in the application process is, has the applicant demonstrated that there's a community need for this school and that the community's on board and that they will have an enrollment that is sustainable for the school financially, even beyond the CSP grant. Once those grant funds expire at the end of the grant project period, which will probably be a minimum, let's say at least 24 months, and it'll probably be a little bit longer than that. The school is expected to kind of make it on its own with its, average daily attendance and state funding, and then it's a commensurate share of state and federal program funding. So there's no minimum enrollment required to be awarded a CSP grant. The presumption is if it's a strong application that demonstrates the areas of need, is ultimately authorized by the commissioner and not vetoed by the State Board of Education, and isn't already receiving CSP grant funds through some CMO grant that an entity may have applied for, then we can totally award CSP funds to that charter school.
Thank you. I have several more questions. Let's see, here's a question for you, Heather. Could an existing charter school apply for a new charter? In other words, could the board of an existing charter school be the sponsoring entity of another charter school?
The provisions in the statute, the charter school law, prohibit that from occurring. Most simply put, one charter board, one charter. There are some charters in our portfolio who have 2 charters or more. Harmony comes to mind, but they were grandfathered in prior to the 2013 legislation passing.
Thank you. I have a couple more questions for you, Heather. How small can the student population be to start?
We recognize that when you are scaling up, when you are first launching, and particularly in the landscape we find ourselves in right now, it's difficult. We also recognize that for financial viability, you should be serving around 250 students. That's not to say that your first years of operation could not reflect a smaller number, but we do want to be very transparent. Both Yolanda and Pija, myself, we've all talked about that conservative estimation in terms of financial funding associated with the weighted average daily attendance. The reason for that is if you don't have strong philanthropic funds, the access to FSP is going to be rather limited if you have a small ADA that you're reporting. So financial viability really points to about 250 students. Academic accountability, we look at 100 students at a minimum. Have charters open with less? The answer is yes. Have they struggled immensely? The answer is yes. And so really there are a lot of factors into that, but we really look at 100 students as being something that you should be aiming for. Sorry to be so long-winded.
Thank you. I have a couple more questions. Here's another virtual school question. Can a virtual school be started in cooperation with a sponsor school in Texas?
So charter schools cannot authorize other charter schools. There are the state's portfolio, and that's what we are talking about today when I was making my opening remarks. Our staff support the Commissioner of Education in the oversight and management of the state's portfolio. School districts may authorize charter schools as well. So within the state's portfolio, you could not find another charter school that could sponsor you, and you would be your own standalone entity. We have had folks that have not made it through the application process who have gone to work essentially for an existing charter school. The district authorized charter schools, that's an entirely different story, and I would have to look into that or refer you to actually Marion Shuddy, who provides supports to districts to operate district authorized charter schools. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, we have several more questions, a couple for John at the end, but Heather, may I open a private charter under the umbrella of a university?
A private charter, I'm not quite sure what a private charter is, but you, again, the eligible entities that, if you remember that slide deck, there were 4 boxes. Nonprofit, a 501c3 is one of the eligible entities, and most of you in this virtual room are nonprofit 501c3s. Governmental entities, and then universities. Universities may apply for either a subchapter D charter or a subchapter E charter. It's college and university charters. They are the applicant, they are not the authorizer. So if you're wanting to open a charter under a university, you would be approaching that university and essentially contracting with the university to then apply for a charter.
She meant regular charter.
Okay, subchapter D charter?
She didn't say, she just said regular charter, not private charter. One more
Okay.
question for you, and then I have some for John. Plagiarism question. May I cite, I applied last year, so this is a plagiarism question. May I cite myself at the beginning, or must I cite myself throughout?
So I will just say this. We really do want to see everything that you are going to be offering your students should you be awarded a charter. We have seen applications that have really communicated that very succinctly in 500 pages. And then we've also seen applications that have run 1,300 pages with addendums and whatnot. When we run through the various software programs for the plagiarism checker, it's going to highlight every single instance, and we have to check that. So if you are using that, aids are review of the application. We have a very short turnaround time. So I would say erring on the side of just saying, as noted in our Gen 25 application, or if it was an earlier application, facilitates not only our review of it, but also keeps you focused on your new materials and previous materials.
Thank you. John, I have several questions that are for you. First of all, are they allowed to see the results from the polls, and how do we want to work that?
I will look at Zoom to see if there is a way to do that. It might be, depending on, we'll talk with our IT people, but just in terms of what that's going to look like in terms of personal information, things like that. But
Okay.
I'll follow up in the FAQ.
And then should the public meeting advertisement be printed a certain number of days before public meeting?
So the application doesn't say, but by default, because you have to send email notifications to certain individuals at least 5 days before your meeting, because you're gonna have to send those emails out 5 days before your meeting. So I'm gonna say at least 5 days.
Thank you. With
And I'm just going to jump in. There are certain things that we've highlighted that we're like, err on the side of early notification, because something as simple as that, you don't want it to in any way trip you up. I know that I have heard legislators and state board members say they, their schedules are busy. And if they are able to attend, they would have liked to attend, but the late notice prevented them from attending. So I offer that for you to consider.
Okay, John, a couple more, and then Heather, another virtual question in a minute. Because COVID may be around a while, do we need to address virtual options? I'm assuming curricular options.
That's a great question. I think that our external reviewers are going to find merit. There's no specific question in the Generation 26 app that asks specifically for those contingent virtual setting instructional forms. But that being said, I think it can only benefit a application. However, in the rubric, there is no place that would detriment an applicant for not including that information. So it can only help, but it's not going to hurt.
And I will say that, just in your communication, in your narrative, we all know the landscape we find ourselves in, and it's very uncertain. And, we don't know where we're going to be a year from now. And so as you're planning, as John said, there's no detriment to highlighting the fact that you may be segueing, transitioning to meet the needs of the medical or health needs, I guess more accurately, the health needs of your students by providing an appropriate vehicle for education.
And
so,
Drew, I wanted to
quick,
jump
Arnold.
in on that too. Yeah, sorry. I attended a meeting yesterday with the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, and they did some kind of a survey where they discovered, like, parents of students who are attending school right now, like the overwhelming majority, like between 60 and 70%, depending on the student demographic, of the parents don't want things to go back to the way they were before COVID. They want these, these new flexibilities and innovations to actually remain even post-COVID. So I think it would be a good idea for charters to plan for, these different learning methods. You can certainly use CSP grant funds to purchase, equipment and computers and networking, and get your teachers trained up on teaching in this new environment that we find ourselves in. And so, I would encourage applicants to consider that.
Drew, so by my clock, we should have 10 minutes left to hit that 30-minute mark, but because we started late, we've been having some complications. I'm willing to add, Drew, do you want to add 10 more minutes to it? And then we'll add 10 more minutes to next week's Q&A as well.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a Montessori school in a church.
Oh,
but
sorry, Heather.
I apologize. I do have another meeting that I am supposed to be starting right now. And so I leave you in good hands. And I appreciate your endeavors. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
Okay, I have a Montessori school in a church, but I'm not affiliated to the church. It's a private school. And am I eligible to turn it into a chartered Montessori?
So good question. So to be a sponsoring entity, you obviously can't be a private institution. You need to be a 501c3 nonprofit in Texas. That being said, the company would either have to transition services to this 501c3. But no, a private company, that private entity could not apply for a charter.
Can charters participate in UIL sports?
I can actually answer this one. The short answer is yes. There are a variety of reasons why charters don't, but they are eligible to, and there are also separate interscholastic leagues that charters can participate in the event that they don't choose to go with UIL.
Thank you. We have another virtual question, and I think that she's having trouble. Her Zoom is breaking up, but we can go ahead and ask. If you start a brick and mortar charter, can it be a blended platform, or does it have to be 100% on campus?
That's a good question. I think I might need more information on that, unless, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think it was just gonna, right now, the 2021 school year is kind of blended, I think. We don't, these Generation 26 charters won't be authorized until the fall of summer to fall of 2021 to open in the fall of 2022. So the 22-23 school year, I think we can't really see what things are going to look like, but it's going to really depend on, several factors on whether students have returned to school full time or whether, school districts and charter schools have adopted some sort of blended learning,
thank
to be
you.
continued, I think.
I will address it in the FAQ of okay. Arnold, this is for you. What percentage of charter awardees that are eligible and apply for a CSP grant ultimately obtain funding?
What percentage of charters? I mean, it's kind of not relevant. A lot of it depends on how much funding is available to start with for any given cycle. And so, again, full disclosure, we have $18 million available for funding total at $900,000 grant award, maximum grant award. So, it'll depend on how competitive, honestly, the process is. The more applicants, obviously, that apply for a charter and are potentially ultimately authorized, if for some reason the commissioner were to be able to authorize 30 charters, we wouldn't be able to award, all 30 of them CSP grant funds. But historically, I think the issue really boils down to how many charter schools is the commissioner authorizing over the last 5 years. And I think that answers, generally between 3 to 5 charters. And that's the critical thing. So anticipating in, future iterations of the application for charter, we would assume, very similar numbers, 3 to 5 charters annually that would be ultimately, if authorized, would be eligible to receive the grant, barring any CMO affiliation that would prohibit that.
Thank you. I have one more question. It seems to be the last. Can a charter partner with a public school in offering athletics? And I think they mean ISD.
That's a great question. I would have to check on that unless any of the other panelists have an answer to that one. I don't think I've been asked that question.
The only way that I've heard that addressed before is by possibly sharing practice space or fields or for playing the sports. But as far as I know, we'll have to verify this through the FAQ. The charter school would need to have its own team and participate in its own play league separately from an ISD, as far as I know.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. I mean, I think that question used to come up like, well, our charter school's not going to offer sports like football, right? Or UIL sports. And so they're like, can our charter school students, join the football team of the school district in which they reside and still play football? And it's like, no, they can't play football on a team for a school district in which they're not enrolled. And so, the student would have to make the hard choice of, do I want to continue to go to this public school that maybe isn't meeting my educational needs, but I really want to play football? Or am I going to go to this charter school that may better meet my educational needs, but doesn't offer football? And that totally bears into the decision-making process, I think.
One last question, and I don't know that we have an answer for it. What has caused most applicants to be denied a charter? I know the reasons are varied across the board, but what in y'all's experiences have caused an application to get denied? School board governance, curriculum? Anybody want to take that?
That's a good question. Don't hold me to it right now because I don't have the official data on hand, but I think in reviewing external review results, I think the finance section is what applicants tend to struggle with the most. And then beyond that are special population services and planning for that. As you can remember in Heather's slide, one of those top 10 kind of pitfalls was an applicant's ability to adequately plan for their special populations. So I would say finance and special populations are typically the lower scoring sections of an applicant's proposal.
That's all I have right now.
All right, looks like we have about 62 people still watching. So thank you all for sticking around. Looks like we are done with this webinar session. I did want to say you are more than welcome to register for next week's as well, as someone probably already mentioned. Again, we'll do the same sort of Q&A session format. So thank you all so much for attending. Have a great day, and we hope that this Zoom format worked out better for you than traveling to Austin. But we'll look forward to looking over some of those survey results as we get them in. Thank you all. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.